My name is Wallace Beaton, and I'm the Manager of Community Engagement and Capacity for the Ontario Active School Travel, a program of Green Communities Canada. Green Communities is a national association of organizations working from the ground up for transformative change in areas like zero waste, eco-efficient homes and businesses, active transportation, and green infrastructure. We have been the lead organization promoting active school travel in Ontario since 1996. And we do this through research, advocacy, training, resources, events, partnerships, and on-the-ground programming. The goal for our Ontario Active School Travel program is to make walking, cycling, and other forms of active and sustainable transportation the norm for school trips. To help us reach that goal, the Ontario government is providing Green Communities with $3.5 million between October 2017 and August of next year to take active school travel to the next level across the province. This is allowing us to provide support for walk and wheel to school initiatives in a record-setting 50 communities in Ontario. So we know we've had a lot of interest in this webinar, and we have people logging in from many different locations. So we just wanted to very quickly bring up a poll and just ask you to let us know where you are joining us from today. So if everyone can see the poll, I just ask you to quickly click on the appropriate name. We've got folks from the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, southwestern Ontario, eastern Ontario. We've got somebody from Niagara. We've got some folks from outside of Ontario and as well as outside of Canada. So quite a broad geographic spread for this webinar, which is really, really encouraging for us. Show everybody so you can have a look. Great, so thank you very much. So before we get started with the webinar, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, we will be keeping everyone on mute throughout the webinar. If you have any technical issues or problems, please use the chat box to notify us. And one of my colleagues, Kate Berry or Selena Churro will be happy to assist you. The webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with the slides and recording in the near future. There will be 2 presentations of about 20 minutes each, followed by a question and answer period. During the presentations, we encourage you to type your questions into the chat box and send to everyone. We will track the questions and work through them together after the presentations. The webinar will officially end after 1 hour. However, our presenters have agreed to remain online to continue answering questions should there be a need. So today's webinar is entitled In the Eye of the Beholder, Parent and Child Perceptions of Active School Travel. Engaging both children and adults is critical to the success of any active school travel initiative. Yet these 2 groups can have very different perceptions and attitudes about walking and wheeling to school. Through today's webinar, we want to share some key findings from several recent studies that explore the journey to school from the unique viewpoints of students and parents. We hope that some of these research findings can help inform and strengthen your messaging and tactics. Our first presentation will focus on child perceptions, and we have 2 presenters. The first is Dr. Jason Gilliland, who is Director of the Human Environments Analysis Laboratory, or HEAL, at Western University in London, Ontario. He is also Director of the Urban Development Program and a professor in the Department of Geography. His current research focuses on the relationship between modern urban planning and development practices and the rise of children's health and quality of life issues, such as physical inactivity, obesity, mental health, and sleep. Jason believes that by gaining a better understanding of how environmental characteristics influence population health and well-being, we can better inform policymakers and city planners on how to make effective changes to policy and neighborhood design. His co-presenter is Dr. Andrew Clark, who is the project coordinator and senior research associate at HEAL. His research examines environmental influences on children's health with a focus on physical activity, active transportation, and healthy eating. His research frequently involves working with community collaborators to evaluate community-based interventions that help build the evidence to increase funding and sustainability of their work. Andrew is also co-chair of the Active and Safe Routes to School Steering Committee of Elgin, Middlesex, London, and Oxford. So I'm now going to turn over the presentation, the webinar, to Jason and Andrew.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Can you see our slides? I hope so.
Yeah, they look good.
Well, we're pleased to be able to speak with you today about some of our work on understanding children's perceptions of barriers and enablers to active school travel. I'm Jason Gilliland.
And I'm Andrew Clark.
And before we go too far, we'd like to acknowledge our co-author, Catherine Wilson. Catherine was the lead author of the children's perceptions papers that we're primarily going to speak about today. She completed her master's in geography at Western and is now working as the active transportation coordinator in Essex County. So she's living proof that there is life after grad school. Secondly, we'd also like to thank our regional Active and Safe Routes to School committee, who are a fantastic group of community partners working hard to encourage children and families to choose active transportation. Finally, we'd like to thank our school board partners for supporting our active school travel projects. I should also say thanks to the team in the Human Environment Analysis Lab, or HEAL for short, because over the past decade, literally hundreds of students from the HEAL have worked on active and safe routes to school projects in our region. For those of you who don't know, the HEAL is a multidisciplinary research and training environment based in Western's Department of Geography. Our mission is to develop and connect highly skilled researchers to create, disseminate, and mobilize knowledge for making healthy, thriving communities. And in the HEAL, we specialize in cross-sector community collaborations for planning and public health issues. The team is always in flux, given to students coming in and out, but this year we had about 20 staff and faculty associates, 20 grad students, 120 undergrads, and 4 high school interns. We've also worked with over 100 community collaborators, an influential local expert advisory panel, or the HEAL LEAP, as well as a highly active youth advisory council of local teams. Okay. As a bit of a background for our presentation, I wanted to briefly highlight the evolution of HEAL research on the subject of active school travel. So as far back as around 2005, we began our quest to gain a better understanding of how individual level factors, as well as environmental factors, influence children's modes of travel to and from school. This early research was funded by the Heart and Stroke Foundation and the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, so thank you very much. We produced a few articles which identified how environmental factors such as distance between home and school, number of major streets crossed, and traffic volume had negative influences on the likelihood of using active school travel, whereas sidewalk density, street connectivity, and street tree density had positive influences on the likelihood of using active school travel. Around the same time, we were also trying to look at how travel mode has an impact on children's environmental exposures. In particular, we use objective measures to show how walkers were actually exposed to less air pollution than those who were driven. We just published that paper recently. We eventually moved on from these studies describing simple correlations and patterns of behaviors to try to figure out how to develop and implement effective interventions to change travel behavior and get more children walking and wheeling to school. Recently, Adrian Buttazzoni, a HEAL master student of mine in the Health and Rehab Sciences program at Western, focused his thesis on reviewing different AST interventions, interviewing key members of ACERT's committees to better understand implementation issues, and then quantitatively evaluating the effectiveness of AST interventions. All of this research has helped us to get a better sense of what elements are needed for successful intervention, and has also reconfirmed that much more work is still to be done. So while that research using GIS to objectively measure the built environment taught us a lot, it also helped us recognize that there were other factors, perhaps more subjective factors, which also had an important influence on the choice of travel mode. And this led us to explore parent and child perceptions of barriers and enablers to AST, which Andrew is going to talk about next.
Thanks, Jason. I will start off by talking about research we published last year, examining perceptions of barriers that influence active school travel. We conducted this study as our research shows that children actually want to walk and wheel to school, but many are still not doing this. By understanding the perceived barriers to active school travel, we can figure out why children are not being active during their daily commutes. Therefore, the purpose of this paper is to better understand how parents and children perceive barriers to active school travel differently, and how these perceived barriers influence their travel behavior. Data was collected in 48 elementary schools from across southwestern Ontario. The children that participated in our study were in grades 4 to 8 and lived within 1.6 kilometers of their school. This provided us with a sample of 1,296 children and their parents. Each parent and child completed their own survey, which asked questions about demographics and socioeconomic status, mode of travel to and from school, and the barriers to active school travel. So first, we evaluate the differences between parent and child perceptions of the barriers. We found parents and children actually do perceive their environments differently. Parents perceive more physical environment barriers, such as distance, sidewalk availability, and bike rack availability, as well as more safety barriers, such as routes feeling unsafe due to traffic, drivers speeding too much, and it being unsafe for children to walk alone. Children, on the other hand, perceive more individual preference barriers, such as the route being boring, they get too hot and sweaty while walking or wheeling, and walking to school not being fun. To better understand the context of our results, we used logistic regression modeling to determine what intrapersonal or individual factors, interpersonal or social factors, and environmental factors need to be controlled for to better understand the chance of a child being an active traveler. The results showed that older children and children with mothers being employed were more likely to walk and wheel. In contrast, children with siblings, families with more vehicles, and those who live farther from the school are less likely to walk or wheel to school. Now we control for those significant factors and examined each barrier to see if they were able to influence children's active school travel. We determined that both children and parent perceptions influence their behavior, especially perceived safety barriers. Despite this, significantly more parents' perceptions of barriers to active school travel influence the decision to walk and wheel compared to children. This really suggests parents are driving a lot of their child's behavior. Finally, we evaluated all of the significant barriers while controlling for other factors and found that parents perceiving too long distances, having no one to walk with, and traffic volume decrease the likelihood of using active school travel. Similarly, children perceiving too few trees and those with concerns about crime are significantly less likely to use active modes. Children are also less likely to walk or wheel when parents and/or children perceive it easier to drive to school. Finally, parents perceiving drivers' speed on streets actually increases the chances of a child using active school travel. The results of this paper show that child and parent perceptions of barriers to active school travel differ and have different impacts on children's travel behavior. Understanding how children and parents perceive the barriers differently can help policymakers and practitioners develop specialized interventions aimed at increasing children's use of active travel and children's overall physical activity. And I'll talk about some of those interventions in a bit. Interventions used to promote active school travel should focus on safety as well as perceptions of distance to break parental habits of routinely driving their children to school. While this data does tell us a lot about how children's perceptions of barriers influence their active school travel, it does not engage children to contextualize the barriers and fails to empower children to develop solutions for these barriers.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I now want to turn to a qualitative study we published earlier this year called Children's Perspectives on Neighborhood Barriers and Enablers to Active School Travel, a participatory mapping study. The majority of research on children's active school travel omits children from the research process, even though children interpret their environments in fundamentally different ways than adults. So the purpose of this study was to use participatory mapping and qualitative GIS methods to examine how children's perceptions of their environments influence their school journey experiences. So the study involved recruiting 2 elementary schools, one urban and one suburban. In total, we undertook 25 map-based focus groups or participatory mapping exercises with a total of 123 students aged 10 to 12 years. And the exercises involved using large aerial photos of the school neighborhood to get children talking about the barriers and enablers to active school travel in their neighborhood. We had students annotate the maps with comments and also identify how they would improve their neighborhoods to make them more walkable. Along with HEAL students, we involved many community partners in these exercises, including the ACERT's committee members, local city planners, engineers, public health professionals, and even London's mayor. I won't go into too much detail about these psychedelic maps, but basically they visualize the hotspots of interest to the children. So intense red represents the most frequently identified or most important barriers to active travel, and intense green represents the most important enablers to active travel. Intense brown areas represent the places where children most frequently identified needed improvements. We also had children annotate all the places they identify on the map with a qualitative comment. For example, this map highlights the hotspots of enablers immediately surrounding this suburban school and identifies what the kids are saying about the environment and how that environment enables active travel. So we can see that students tended to comment on the natural features, such as the walking through what they would call a nice scenic area, or the forest, or the woods. They also spoke about having fun on the hill on the way to school. But it's not only natural features. Children also commented on how infrastructure, such as sidewalks, make the walk easier and more comfortable. As far as the barriers to active school travel, children often spoke about the lack of sidewalks being a safety problem, and also the fact that the traffic made the journey in the drop-off zone really hazardous. So with respect to areas for improvement, children were very vocal. For example, children commented on the need for sidewalks to better maintained in winter, as well as sidewalks to cover both sides of their street. This was particularly in a suburban area, which didn't have great coverage. They also had a lot to say about the congestion and chaos in the drop-off zones and the need for bigger parking lots. Students also wanted wider walkways around the school, as they often get really crammed with pedestrians before and after school. So through our thematic analysis of the map-based focus groups, we identified 3 main themes characterizing barriers and enablers to active school travel. First was safety, then environmental, and then affective features. That is, features that influenced student moods, feelings, or attitudes. So the enablers in green included walking with friends and crossing guards under the safety category, stop signs and shortcuts under the environmental category, and trees and the interactions with crossing guards under affective features. The barriers included traffic and unfamiliar people under the safety category, trains, weather, and distance under the environmental category, and dogs and garbage under the affective features. So again, red, these are features that are barriers to active school travel. The potential improvements included parental influence under the category of safety, sidewalks, drop-off zones, and street signs under the environmental factors, and unfamiliar areas and perceptions of houses under affective features. So these, again, were features that students thought that there could be potential improvements around their school, and that those improvements would help them walk. A key take-home message of this work is that children have meaningful insights to offer towards a better understanding of how their local environment influences active school travel behaviors. And further, children's perceptions can help inform policy and practice supporting localized active school travel interventions.
Now that you've seen our findings, you may be asking the question, so what? Why should you care about the barriers children perceive? I will now answer those questions by focusing on how we are mobilizing this research together with our local Active and Safe Routes to School committee. First, we are working with a number of community partners in schools to develop a Drive to 5 program, where children are given the option of being driven part of the way to school and then walking the last 5 minutes. This will cut down the distance children are required to walk, while still gaining the benefit of little extra physical activity, while decreasing traffic congestion around the school and related air pollution during pickup and drop-off times. We are also working to address barriers related to the convenience of driving to school through our planned pilot of the Walking School Bus program designed by the Canadian Cancer Society. This provides us with the opportunity to increase the number of children who walk from further distances and allow parents the convenience to simply drop their children off at the bus stop and know they will get to school safely. While many parents and children may perceive barriers to active travel, when the barriers are studied through traffic studies and observations, they're frequently shown to have very little in reality. As a result, we need to work to change those perceptions through educational programs. For instance, wayfinding signs tell community members how long it takes to travel from points around the neighborhood to the school. Of course, this does not take into account the 4-year-old student having a meltdown on the sidewalk, but it does help change the perceptions parents have on how far they live from the school, as well as inform drivers that they're close to a school. Safety training about pedestrian safety, bike safety, roundabout, and pedestrian crossings can all decrease perceptions of barriers by increasing the confidence parents and children have on their ability to actively travel safely to and from school. Some of the safety concerns raised by parents and children are actual concerns and need to be addressed through engineering. This leaves STP committees to work with municipalities and the school boards to minimize some of these real safety concerns, such as the disconnected pathways that led children to walk directly through a busy parking lot before this new pathway was built. The infill of sidewalks have also been a hot topic issue in our region, with many neighbors resistant to losing grass and driveway space to sidewalks. Student-led advocacy has encouraged politicians to supply the sidewalks that children and parents identify as important in facilitating safe, active travel to school. Parking lots are always a major issue in a school, as you heard from the comments that Jason shared. Even in schools with kiss and rides, there's still congestion, confusion, anger, and pollution in the air. We have recently piloted a Go Green Travel Clean program where we measure the pollution in the parking lot and share the results with parents and children to help teach them what their idling and unsustainable school travel can do to the lungs of students. Through this program, we are encouraging walking, wheeling to both the school and the bus stop, as well as driving to 5 to hopefully decrease the pollution around the parking lot, especially during pickup times. Student engagement is another important aspect of this work, as children can engage their parents and their peers to change their perceptions and behaviors as it relates to active school travel. We do this through things like a poster contest so children can share why active travel is important to them, conduct active travel story contests that provide children an opportunity to share why they like actively traveling to school. And we even have students create videos highlighting the damage we do to our environment by not using green modes of travel, such as idling, driving to school, and driving to the bus stop. Finally, encouragement can help change school culture and contribute to increasing the number of children who walk and wheel to and from school. While these encouragement campaigns do an awesome job at increasing awareness of active school travel and changing behavior for one day, they generally do not have a lasting impact. But as one of our master students found in a study he conducted last year, encouragement is an important part of school travel planning, along with education, equity, enforcement, and engineering, all of which work together to change perceptions so that people realize active travel is the better, more sustainable way to get to school. Once these perceptions change, we will start seeing culture change where walking and wheeling not only increases, but becomes the default choice for children and parents.
Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, we'll deal with those later. And here is our contact information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jason and Andrew. And I'll just reiterate, if you do have any questions, please, I see we've got one in the chat box, but if you have any other questions from this first presentation, please pop them into the chat box now, and we will we'll address those after we complete our second presentation. So I'll just bring us back. And I'm not sure how we ended up there, but we'll jump ahead. Great, so we're going to move on now to our second presentation, and we're going to shift our focus away from child perceptions to the perceptions of parents, who we all know play a really determining factor in whether or not a child's going to walk or bike to school. So our second presentation is going to be made by Timothy Wollstonecroft, who is the managing partner, co-founder and managing partner of the Strategic Council, a market research firm that specializes in applying sophisticated methodologies to the real-world problems of marketers, policymakers, and strategic decision makers in both government and the private sector. Tim has decades of experience managing complex, large-scale public opinion and market research projects on behalf of clients. His expertise extends from research planning, strategy, and design to the development of tailored, cost-effective methodologies and the creation of surveys and polls, to the analysis, reporting, and presentation of findings to clients. Tim is also a noted qualitative moderator with over 2,500 focus groups under his belt. So Tim, we'll bring up your slides now.
Okay.
I've stopped sharing.
Does everybody see my slides?
They're looking good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to present a qualitative research study that we undertook on behalf of Metrolinx, and Metrolinx was the sponsoring client for this, and they've been very gracious in giving us the go-ahead to make this presentation.
So try clicking on your slide, and then that should activate.
There it is. Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
There we go.
Good. Thank you very much. This qualitative research is based on 13 focus groups conducted amongst parents and guardians of children between who have children between kindergarten through to grade 8 in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. Participants were involved from Bowmanville through to Milton. We completed these groups in December and January of this year. It was involved a broad cross-section, people who drive, people who are driving less than in the past, and those with parents who have children with exceptionalities. So it was pretty broad-based research into what parents thought about the active travel issue. So I'm going to jump right into my executive summary that we presented to Metrolinx. This was a very broad base. We wanted to understand the whole life of a household in the morning. One of our key findings that people, parents feel that they're under tremendous pressure early in the morning. They feel they have a lot to get done. Their children are not particularly cooperative. They're slow getting up, or just slow getting getting ready, showering, bathing, eating, involved in doing gaming and watching TV. There's a real sense of rush and stress in getting out the door. So parents feel pretty pressured, high degree of stress as they get ready to go about their daily activities. Most of the behaviors are pretty habitual. It's almost ritual. By and large, most people were doing the same thing day in, day out. One of the clues that, that's really important, because habits are really formed early. And as a result, people don't really modify their morning activity. It's pretty clear across the focus groups that parents feel that it's easier, more time efficient, more convenient to drive than to walk or bike or public transit or use school bus for the morning drop-off. And that's pretty clear, is that they feel they have other things they have to get to. You have the people who are parents who are going on to their job. In some cases, they're actually coming home and they're working at home. So there is tremendous pressure for them to preference to drive to work than walking or biking. The interesting thing here is that, by and large, most people get the advantages of walking and cycling. This is not new to people. It's almost baked in. People understand it's better for their health, better for their children's health, better for everybody's health to walk or cycle. The challenge is that the disadvantages of walking to drivers are just much more specific, much more tangible, and a lot more compelling at 8:30 in the morning than thinking about the advantages of walking or cycling. This is really important, is that we don't see a lot of rich terrain to change behavior by arguing or messaging around the advantages of walking and cycling. Obviously, that's part of the messaging, but it's not going to be the messaging that changes and say, oh, I got to walk. I got to have my children walk, or I should be walking with them. Because they're under a lot more pressure to do something else, which is drive their kids to school, drop them off, and get to work. And that's why we say that the disadvantages really overpower the advantages for most parents. The interesting, this is another thing, the parents readily understand. Oops. I'm still connected?
Yes, you are, Tim. You were cutting in and out a little bit.
Okay, good. Parents readily concede that the scene around the school is chaotic, mayhem, and dangerous. They understand that. In fact, it comes out of their mouths the first thing, one of the questions we ask them. They know, they believe it's very dangerous. The attitude is that many is just to grin and bear it. They recognize that the chaos, the traffic, is an issue, but it's not one that they have any ownership over, because their issue is, I got to get to work, or I have to get onto my next errand. And they actually don't see themselves as causing the problem. It's everybody else. They should be walking, not me. I have a more compelling reason to drive. Now, public transit as an option was really not a lot of interest, a lot of comfort, particularly in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, particularly the younger ones, younger children, wasn't viewed as a very viable option. Was a little bit more acceptable for older children, but even then there was some discomfort about having their daughters go on public transit. There was a lot of anxiety about safety and commuting times. And there was a lot of anxiety about public transit. It was seen as a little bit more acceptable for returning home from school. School buses had some appeal, but there were a lot of complaints about the experience. Extended commuting times, being at a specific spot for pickup, they still had to get there. Drop-off process, what was going to happen to my son or daughter as they got off. Worries about bullying on the school, quality of the school buses. There was a lot of issues raised around the school the school bus option. Although there's clearly there's some appetite, some people do want the school option, but often they were disqualified because they're living too close to the school. The interesting thing is that people don't really perceive a difference between the school drop-off and the pickup. People talked about it was as crazy at the end of the day as it was at the start of the day. In fact, people talked about they jostle, they come early to get the prime spot, pick up their son or daughter. But in reality, more parents see more options for the afternoon pickup than they do in the morning. The interesting thing is about school programs to manage traffic, and obviously this is a very reasonable undertaking. Kiss and ride tactics, all that is very reasonable because the schools are trying to manage traffic congestion to deal with the problem of the volume. The challenge there is, in fact, what's happening. The collateral damage is actually making the experience of dropping off more tolerable. And in fact, my takeaway from this is that school programs had to do this kiss and ride thing programs, but it's actually an enabler. It's actually facilitating the and motivating parents to drop off their kids. But at this stage, you cannot take away that kiss and ride, given the fact that parents would be completely outraged by that. Oops, went ahead. Walking Wednesdays, people were generally aware. They liked, they were nice. They were some awareness of bike weeks. Really, those programs are really not effective in changing behavior on a sustained basis, because really the benefits of driving on the day after outweigh the perceived benefits of walking and cycling. By the way, parents have lots of ideas about how to manage the school traffic issue. But the fact is, a lot of these things aren't going to work because they don't really believe there's a rationale for changing their behavior. They don't see why should they change. I mean, the ideas were contests, more walking, buddy systems, extending drop-off, pickup times, more school buses, more before and after school process, more crossing guards, better urban planning, more walkways, increasing enforcement. The problem with this is that they don't see why should they change their behavior. Because they've got other things that are much more compelling to them than engaging in some of these activities. By the way, walking school bus, a lot of interest in it. But I should tell you, there were a lot of questions and doubts, organizational challenges, liability issues, volunteer competencies, perceived risk of the unknown. But it's an interesting idea that a lot of parents did like. So, where does that leave us? Where does this, and the people who sat in the back room were very glum after hearing all this. And in fact, I heard a lot of the observers of the focus groups were depressed. And I understand that. But I think what needs to happen coming out is that we need to really trigger a parental rethink. We need to start to think about how to communicate with them in a strong and emotional way why they need to change their behavior. And because rational messaging ain't going to do it, because they have other more emotional reasons. And I think that the frontier, the new, where you have to start to focus is what we've already heard from them. They recognize there is an issue around the school. It's about safety. And that is a problem. They understand. They live it every day. They're poo-pooing it and pushing it aside as part of living in a large urban city. But they will connect emotionally to the safety issue. And that's where we think where you need to move. Because the reality is, we're at square one of this problem. Because they don't see they're the problem. Other people are causing the problem, including the number of school buses. We're really at the start. They don't see themselves. Why should they change? They don't see themselves as causing the problem. That is everybody else's, including the school buses. So we see we're really at square one, and we need to find a way to get to square two, and then down the road to square three. And it's going to involve some grassroots. And we see this as a much more multi-pronged staged process, much more focused on individual schools, getting alignment between the parents, not the parents, but the principals and the teachers and the school councils. They were identified as change agents. Ways to motivate parents, to start to, the parents start to see that they're the ones causing the problem. And there are a lot of stakeholders that can play a supporting role, but the action has to happen in the school, individual schools. Principals have a role, teachers have a role, school councils need to be very involved. The children need to have their, the teaching modules and the contests and all them, and all the things we heard in the previous presentation. The crossing guards need to be part of it, ultimately to get to the parents. I want to briefly just cite and just go over this, very, very important. People they understand the advantages of walking. We have to understand that, they get it, they know. But the problem is that that's already baked in. Yes, we get that. We know that there's a lot of advantage of the walking, but the disadvantage is just too big. And they overpower. And we need to deal with some of this, and we think the safety is where to go. And the same with the cycling. You know, yeah, there are a lot of benefits to cycling, people will acknowledge, but the disadvantages are just too strong and overpowering. And parents have a lot of suggestions, which I alluded to earlier. You know, they get it. They have a lot of suggestions which should happen. None of these are going to work in the absence of them coming to terms that they're the cause of the problem on an individual basis. Schools need to, the parents need to know that their behavior is, and that's only going to take grassroots, and it's going to take some effort. In our presentation, what we talked to Metrolinx about is one campaign, you know, to kind of start to rethink, a parental rethink about school traffic congestion. And there's one campaign that kind of stood out. This is just one campaign. I'm sure there's lots of others, but this one was really just recent in the city of Toronto. It was called The Art of Distraction. It was a very vivid, very moving. We did some focus groups around this. People were crying in the focus groups around this when they read the personal stories surrounding accidents and safety issues. It's going to take some emotional driven messaging to wake up parents to this problem, and to start to take ownership of the issue. And we make the point, you know, even stats says it's going to be a catalyst. It's going to take some emotional messaging to disrupt the parental behavior around taking their children to school, and to start to trigger a change process. Anyway, that's the summary of our research that we did this past winter. And thank you very much, and we're certainly open for questions.
Yes, so thank you very much, Tim. I'm just going to So indeed, we are going to move into our question and answer period now for all of our presenters. And I just wanted to make sure that that Jason and Andrew are unmuted now as well so that they can respond.
Hello, yes, we are.
That's great. So I think, Kate, you have been monitoring the chat room, and I know we have a few questions that have been posted there. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Thanks, Wallace. Yes, we do have some questions. So we'll start with questions related to Jason and Andrew's presentation. The first was from Daniel Hall. He asked, why was drivers' speed on streets positively correlated with active school travel?
I can answer that one. We were shocked at first about that finding, but then we paused and realized that's a correlation, not a causation. So what it is, that seems to be correlated with kids who are actually walking. And kids are walking or biking, but most of them are walking. So kids who are in cars aren't going to have that same experience of drivers speeding on streets, because they're in the car, might be playing their Game Boy in the back seat or reading or whatever they're doing. So I think that's what it is. It's that, that's correlated with walkers because walkers are perceiving the cars on the streets. That makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so next question. And this was from Zhao, who asked, I'm curious about student engagement. What are the incentives in getting students to participate in your studies and in your work? So do they receive any stipends?
For the actual research part, the student engagement is done just by, they get a color changing pencil for participating in our studies. We don't do a whole lot in terms of rewarding participation for these kinds of projects, but it does get kids excited and their parents give permission to do it. But in terms of the active school travel, like how we're actually engaging students to participate in some of the intervention work we're doing, it's really, we're really collaborating with the schools. The schools aren't just there as sort of research subjects per se. We're embedded within the school. We're working closely with teachers to develop programs and projects that are directly related to the curriculum so that they can do it as part of their everyday activities. So and that's the perfect example is that Go Green Travel Clean Challenge that we did, where it's really about the students did all of the work with that project. They developed the intervention materials. They decided what they want to promote. The signs that I showed were ones that the kids developed. So it was all done by the kids, and it fits really nicely into the grade 5 science and civic studies curriculum. So it's just finding those connections, finding teacher champions that can help you ensure that you're aligning with the work they're doing, makes this a lot simpler and get way more buy-in by the schools.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And I think Zhao was just adding to that. I think the question wasn't specific to the research, but it was more about, in general, getting students involved with creating materials like videos. I'm guessing from what you're saying that usually the students are really keen if you present those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, the students, by us working with the teachers, we give them topics, things that they're interested in, and they really just jump aboard. And it's crazy how much more enthusiastic they get once they're part of it. And then the peer-to-peer mentorship, especially kids younger than them, just go crazy for it.
This, just to add, this is the perfect example of community-based participatory research. Like, they're not really our research subjects, or we're trying to entice them to participate in our research. It's more like they're asking us to help them with an issue that they deal with, and we all work together to figure out a solution. So sometimes it's research, sometimes it's just activities with the school community.
Great, thank you. Okay, and we also had a question about the air quality monitoring that you mentioned. Is that something you're looking for more information? Is that something that you have any information online about the measurement of emissions, how it's done, the tools that are used?
We're actually in the middle of creating a toolkit to help other schools sort of adapt it. We've actually been doing, as Jason alluded to in our introduction, we have been doing this kind of air pollution monitoring off and on since 2008. But just now we're starting to collaborate with school board partners and schools to really embed it, this within the program, within the work we do in the schools. So we use devices called Purple Air 2s, which are ones that Matt Adams used for his project that he gave a webinar with you guys about in the winter. And really it's just you put these things up, we have battery packs attached to them, it collects data, and then you can take it and analyze it. And you can see, you saw in that, in our presentation, we had a snapshot of one day of observations of what it looks like around the school parking lot.
Can I jump in on the environmental green? We did test that in the focus groups with parents. The parents basically rejected it. It just didn't have any impact. It would have, they would not recalibrate their behavior based on the fact that there's more pollution around schools. That's not wasn't a consideration for them.
But I think the one thing to think about with that is sort of like recycling back in the 90s and early 2000s. The kids taking that message home, even talking to parents at some events we've held at that school, the parents are saying their kids are telling them every time they stop their car, even at a drive-through, to turn off the car. Why are they idling? And that kind of message, the guilt trip from the kids to the parents can actually change that perspective.
Yeah, and I think that probably is true. Is kids are the better route. I'm talking about broader just messaging to the parents. It's not gonna. Yeah, I don't think it's gonna have much impact.
Yeah, we'll have to see. We probably need some randomized control trials and on a large scale to see just if that plays out at a larger population level.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to jump across to some of the questions that came in during Tim's presentation. So just interested in thinking about some of the solutions. And so Tim, you made it pretty clear about the need for strong emotionally driven messaging, but some of the questions here we're thinking through, well, so how would we encourage park and walk a block, the sort of drive to 5 to school, rather than utilizing the nice convenient kiss and ride on the school site? And it might be
we had some parents adopt that, that they parked 5 minutes or further away. Yeah, they did that kind of, we heard that is a potential option. But keep in mind, our view coming out of this qualitative is, if they don't think they're causing the problem, why would I change my behavior? Why would I want? When they think the other parents really don't have the reason to drop their kids off. They don't see them as and I think our perspective is the parents need to see that they're the problem, source of the problem. And they currently don't see that.
Kate, I'm just going to jump in because I had a question for Tim, and I just think it flows nicely here. Tim, who would you? So obviously you've recommended we need much stronger, more emotional messaging targeting the driving parents. We'll call them maybe the hardcore driving parents, and to focus on the safety piece. I'm just curious, from the focus groups or any other work that you've done, do you have any comments about who are the best messengers for those messages? Is it their children? Is it other parents who are perhaps demonstrating the behaviors that we'd like their counterparts to copy? Just, do you have any insights on?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question, and it's a very important question. Is who's the messenger? And from this qualitative, I would say that the best messengers are within the school themselves. It's identifying the principals have a role, the teachers have a role, the parents themselves in the school, the school councils, if there's a good school council, an effective school council, or effective home and school. It's the parents inside the school that are the best messengers for this. They're going to be more likely to have impact. But they need all the tools and all the resources to act and to carry out. So I think those are the best spokespersons or messenger carriers. The schools themselves need to come up with the solutions, and they have to involve the parents themselves. No question. No question. And the children have a role. It's absolutely, I love that other research showing the children are advocates. Absolutely. That's why the teachers are so important, because they need to be motivating and activating the children as well. Absolutely. The front line of this is right inside the school, into changing parents' behavior and triggering a rethink. And
Tim,
it's not an email to the parents. They need some really good tools to understand what the problem this is causing.
Tim, one of the examples that you cited was the Art of Distraction
Yes.
campaign.
Yeah.
There was a question from the audience whether there has been any evaluation that you're aware of that campaign.
Yeah, there's been an evaluation. Keep in mind, that was a different campaign, which really was dealing with distracted driving, cycling, and walkers. And it did have some impact. People were much more tuned in to that problem. But that was a mass communications. I mean, one of the great things that you have here is that you can target the communication right at the schools. I mean, it's which can have high potential of being effective. And if it's well produced and if there's strong production values around it. I only cited the Art of Distraction because it was a very emotional advertising that clearly people, once they were exposed to it, had an impact.
Thank you, Tim. I think this question is more for Andrew and Jason. So I'm kind of aggregating a couple of questions that I've seen in the chat box, but they're both around, how can we encourage parents to engage in some of the kind of solutions given some of the barriers. So things like neighborhoods where crime is an issue, or sort of locations where or families that have sort of really difficult logistics with multiple children going to different destinations and getting to work. I think, Andrew, you presented a few potential solutions, and maybe it's about offering a range of those to improve convenience and improve options for parents who are under pressure.
Yeah, it's Jason. I think education is so important. Education about perceptions versus reality. Although sometimes perceptions is more important than the reality when it comes to your own child. So about crime rates or fear of safety, etc. We could, we already had a lot of examples come up with issues about, maybe there is some parental accompaniment, walking school bus programs, walking with friends, other options like that have to be fully tried. Yes, for those ones that have busy schedules, maybe it's a bit of and we do see this, they drive the child in the morning, but they get to walk home by themselves in the evening or the afternoon. We see in all the studies we do, we see about 10% more of kids walking home after school than they do to school. So that would lead you to believe that those 10%, it's not about safety, it's about timing. Andrew, do you have any specific comments?
I mean, I think when it comes to all this, I also saw a question about sort of how to promote and get people to use the Drive to 5. And it really just comes down to who's sending the message home. How are we going to incentivize people to use it? And I know you're not going to be able to do this long term. You can't do a prize every day for using a Drive to 5 program. But can we show people by using a Drive to 5, make it a huge thing, our principal at our school is going to have Tim Hortons coffee and donuts the first Friday of the year next year to get people to go there. Can that start getting people to see, okay, this is actually really easy. I can do this quickly. I can get out of here way faster than navigating that crazy parking lot in the morning. And then the same after school. So what can we do to just get people to try it once, try it twice? Even the idea of sharing responsibility of walking to school. we always seem to have parents have no trouble getting their kids to soccer and baseball and all these after-school events through carpooling and other things. But school somehow has to be different. Like, why can't parents partner up and have a way to connect people so they can share the responsibilities if they live in similar areas? So I think it's just creative solutions, as well as some of the more on the books things like the Drive to 5, walking school bus, and just try as many things as possible, see what clicks with your school community.
So it is 2 o'clock, and our webinar was scheduled to end after an hour. But as I mentioned at the top, our presenters have agreed to remain online to continue answering questions for any of our participants who want to stay online with us. For those of you that are leaving now, we want to thank you for joining us today for, in fact, what has turned out to be one of our most well-attended webinars to date. You can stay in touch with us via the email on your screen, and if you are not already subscribed to our e-newsletter, you can do that from our website. The URL is in the lower left-hand corner, as well as follow us all on Twitter and Facebook. Our handle is @OntarioAST. So as I know people will start to leave, I want to, on behalf of everyone, thank our 3 presenters today, Jason Gilliland and Andrew Clark from Western University, and Tim Wollstonecraft from the Strategic Council for contributing their research and ideas and feedback for all of our benefit. And as I mentioned, we'll continue on now with some of the remaining questions in the chat box. But if you're leaving us today, thanks for joining us, and we hope you'll attend another webinar in the future.
Thanks, Wallace. Okay, so back to the chat box. I'm going to answer one myself. We had someone asking more about the Walk a Block initiative, so your Drive to 5 initiatives, encouraging parents to drop the students off a block or 2 away from school. What about the neighbors complaining about vehicles stopping in front of their homes? I think that's why if you want to implement an initiative like that, it does need to be a concerted campaign, and you need to do it in partnership with the school board, with the municipality, and involve the community in planning the campaign and planning that program, so that everyone's informed and can communicate and plan out make sure that you choose locations that are the best locations possible. Okay, so that would be my sort of advice from experience of working with schools. We also had a question from Suzanne. So Suzanne, you were making a connection between the 2 presentations. So I think one of the factors mentioned in the presentation from Jason Andrew was about working mothers being a positive influencer on student active transportation. And so how does that relate to parental attitudes about driving because of work needs? Like, Tim, with your study, did you see a split of parents working outside of the home and parents who work at home or are not working, whether that affects how their children travel to school?
Do you want me to jump in on that last question? Certainly parents who are working and having to commute to their work felt a lot more pressure. I was always a little surprised how even those who are working from home felt that pressure too. And to some extent, those even stay-at-home parents felt a need to drive. Yeah, I think that basically those who are commuting to work felt a lot more pressure, and including those who are working at home.
In our study, there was a question about what is the split of parents who work outside the home and parents who don't in the study. In the quantitative paper, it was 73% of moms worked outside the home.
And we haven't done a sub-analysis of that group to see how they perceive things much differently than the non-working parent or mom. But we do know just from our qualitative that it does play a role. and it actually gives kids a little more more independent mobility because they're not there to walk their kids to school. But what it also does, it also might increase some of the younger children within our sample, closer to grade 4 or 5 years, will be driving, the moms will be driving their kids to school a little more. So I guess that's where the divide comes.
Okay, thank you. So another question was thinking more about those members of the school community, the teachers, the staff, the principals at the school. If we want them to be positive messengers and role models, how do we get them to do that if they themselves are driving to school? We know that certainly in Ontario, a lot of teachers are traveling often quite long distances. I don't know if that's something you've studied at the HEAL lab, but do you actively involve teachers? Obviously, there's the curriculum education side of things, but in they themselves and their own travel behaviors, do you address that in your work?
That is a fantastic question. I'll just comment, then I'll let Andrew comment. The reality is, walkability in walkable neighborhoods, it's really tough when you don't work in your neighborhood, and most people don't work in the neighborhood, and teachers can get sent all over the city to work. It's easier for kids if they go live within the school catchment area and go. So naturally you are going to have some teachers who are, a lot of teachers who are driving. But that's not all. I do know of, we work in schools where teachers are biking to work or even walking if they do live in the neighborhood. So we have not yet involved teachers, done actual surveys with teachers in that way, or not that I know of. We have talked to them in other ways. That's a fantastic idea, Kate, for us to start sending surveys to the teachers as well. But it doesn't mean that these teachers, just because they drive to work, doesn't mean that they don't love active travel. So, they may be too far away to bike to work, but they may get on their bike as soon as they get home, or biking more for pleasure or biking to shop. So I guess it's like with any in-school project, is finding the right champion who believes in it, even though if they can't necessarily follow it.
Yeah, and I do know there are schools, one of the schools we worked in for a long time, had their principal led the Walking Wednesday every week, where he would walk from 3 kilometers away every single Wednesday, no matter what the weather was, to get to school, his schedule allowing, and would then lead a walking school bus from that area once he entered the neighborhood to the school. So I think there are lots of opportunities to get principals involved and teachers involved. There's also the opportunity of, what are you doing? How can you bring walking to the curriculum? I know what our local environmental ed coordinator has been preaching this for years, about trying to do multi-criteria or multi-curriculum connections and bringing them together. So yes, teachers can't walk to school, but why can't you have a walking math class where you're going around and bringing math into exploring nature and exploring physical activity all together? So I think there are opportunities for teachers to get involved, even if they're not actively traveling to school, but within the school day.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew and Jason. I think that we've covered most of the main questions that we had today. There's definitely a few comments in there. There's lots of thank yous, and also some support expressed from the audience for a coordinated campaign with that messaging targeted at parents, strong emotion-driven messaging. Is that something that could be done at provincial level at a large scale, that you'd be benefiting from cost sharing of developing that type of initiative?
Kate, I might just, picking up on that, could mention that that is an issue, I guess, that we are looking at the Ontario Active School Travel program. We do have a working group right now that's sort of exploring the issue of parent engagement and the shifting of parental attitudes regarding active school travel, and hoping to identify some some best practices, and also, sort of what some of those potential needs might be for a future campaign, or the development of resources, such as a common set of tools and messaging that could be shared across boards and communities around the province. So that is certainly something that's on our radar. So I think we've come then to the end now, the real end of our webinar. Again, I want to say thank you to Jason and Andrew and to Tim for their time and their insights, and thank you to all of you who participated in the webinar today. And we look forward to you joining us at our next webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.